right now we are seeing stocks trade about flat. The S&P only up by about a tenth of 1%. And right now, one of the weakest performers sector by sector is the energy sector, off by about 0.8%. We are seeing crude come back a little bit, giving some of those gains back from yesterday where it hit a 5-month high, raising new questions about OPEC and everything else going on with stockpiles still rising when you look at some of the other things outside of just crude. So what's really going to go on in these next few months with so many uncertainties? And here to discuss that with us is Dan Eberhart, Canary LLC CEO and author of The Switch, America's Global Energy Renaissance. And Dan, it's good to be chatting with you again. And I just highlight the moves that we're seeing in crude here because of so many unknowns. And of course, we got the EIA numbers yesterday showing a larger than expected drawdown, but still so many questions around storage right now. So what do you make of where we might trade in the next few months?
Well, there's a bunch of currents. As you mentioned, the EIA draw was 7.4 million barrels, and the market was kind of expecting 3 million barrels. So really, that's 2 weeks in a row that we've had a very heavy draw, and I think that's bullish for oil. I think the weak dollar is bullish for oil, and I also think that the unfortunate attacks in Lebanon are bullish on oil. But I think you've got to paint this against the fact that OPEC has said that they're going to release the 2 million barrel hold, or the 2 million barrels that they've kept production that they've kept under wraps. They're going to release that 2 million barrels in the next 60 days. So I think it's surprisingly bullish that oil has basically traded flat in the 40 to 42 range with that news. And I'm looking for oil to go, to drift higher as we head into fall.
Yeah, when we talk about that, I guess so much of that has to do with demand questions here as we see case counts rising in the U.S. as well. You mentioned that 2 million barrel a day drop in terms of OPEC's production cut there. How do you kind of piece those things together? Does demand matter more as we get into the back half in the summer driving season?
Demand matters a lot, but I think that the story of the summer driving and the demand is really a weaker story or a less relevant story than in past years. I really think the bigger story is going to be the supply crunch, what I call the slowly creeping supply crunch, because the cut production is going to be more difficult to return and to turn on the faucet than people expect. And so I think that as demand rises, you're going to see really the sand in the gears as we try to ramp up the production as we move into the fall. And you see that in the probably bottomed out but not yet rising rig count, I think is a harbinger of what's to come, which is higher oil prices towards the back half of the year.
Well, let's also not forget, too, that this is an election year. You're a prominent Trump donor. Of course, we've seen the update in terms of Joe Biden's energy platform, and a lot of people surprised there to see that he didn't necessarily go as far as feared in banning fracking outright. Kind of walking a tightrope here. Obviously doesn't want to offend voters in Ohio or Pennsylvania who might be in the energy space. What's your take on how he's been doing that, though, and how even a Joe Biden election or win might not be as bad for the energy sector as some people had feared just a few months ago?
Sure. So I think with Biden really trying to make an increasing play for Texas and really just Pennsylvania being very critical, he's really got to look to those voters, and a lot of those folks work in oil and gas. And so, look, I think many parts of the Green New Deal are fanciful and don't make sense and are aspirational and not constructive in terms of what we can accomplish. But I think that Biden is really going to hew more towards the center in terms of not banning fracking and in terms of supporting the existing oil and gas jobs that are out there as he tries to make a play for Pennsylvania and Texas. So I think he's really kind of tied himself in a knot, but he is not going to be as progressive and as far left on energy as a lot of people in the Democratic caucus want him to. And I've always thought that this idea of banning fracking is an applause line in a Democratic primary, not really an actual policy move. Because if you flip the question and you ask voters if they want to pay twice as much for gasoline at the pump, the answer is a resounding no. So I think it's an applause line, but not something that actually is a policy prescription for what's going to happen.
Yeah, and we've seen, that's I don't know if that's exactly why we've seen Joe Biden come out kind of more in the center compared to where I'm sure President Trump wish he came out so he could hit back on all of this. But very interesting to watch. Dan Eberhart, always appreciate getting your insights. We'll have you back on as crude continues to move to the downside here. Canary LLC CEO and author of The Switch, America's Global Energy Renaissance. Appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Thanks, Zack.